Hi, my name is Casey Enos. What I'm going to demonstrate for you here today is the way that I start my Introduction to Philosophy course with the discussion of philosophical skepticism or radical doubt. And this is a concept that I use as a springboard for a discussion of further metaphysical and epistemic issues that forms about the first half of my introductory course before we move on to talk about ethics and philosophy of religion and some other topics. All right, so here we go. Welcome to Philosophy 100, Introduction to Philosophy. What we're going to do today is discuss the first chapter from our textbook, Bertrand Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. This picture is called the Flammarion engraving. It's also sometimes called the Seeker. I think it's a great metaphor for what we're doing when we do philosophy or what we're doing in a philosophy class. Notice that this guy is looking out from beyond the realm of day-to-day appearances, the world that he's used to living in, to see the realm of reality that lies beyond, and he's finding out that it's a lot different than what he's used to. So Russell opens his book with a blunt question. He says, "Is there any knowledge in the world so certain that no reasonable man can doubt it?" In other words, what do we really know? What knowledge can we be sure of? Is that something any of you have ever wondered about? What do we really know? What can we be sure of? So Russell's response might have been a little surprising. He says, not much. Certainly not most of the things that we typically take for granted. His example is an ordinary table like the one on this slide. What do we really know about this table? For example, do we know its color? Well, you might say this table's brown, but the brown that you see is going to change as you move around this table and you look at it from different angles and different distances. It's going to look dark brown from some places. It's going to look light brown from others. Sometimes you might even see white where there's a strong glare from the light. And if you start backing away from that table, it's going to look darker and darker until it finally turns black and eventually disappears. It's going to look one color under the bright midday light. In the evening, when the light starts to look red, it's going to look a different way. Not to mention inside under different colored light bulbs or under a black light. And let's not forget that different people see color a little bit differently. Some people, we call them colorblind. They're not sensitive to some distinctions between colors that the rest of us see. But before we say that those people are wrong and the rest of us are right about color, consider that birds, for example, have very good color vision, and they can see a lot of colors that human beings can't. And women see color better than men do for the most part. Most women can see distinctions between shades of color that most human males can't. And even if two people are the same sex and they're standing in the same spot, there's no guarantee that they're going to see the same color. Does anybody remember this that kind of burned up the internet a few years ago? There's a lot of controversy, a lot of disagreement over what color this dress was. Nobody could agree. So it seems like there may be no way we can get people to agree about what color this table is, and we can ask, why does one person have to be right and one person wrong? Maybe there just is no fact of the matter. Maybe there is no one color that belongs to that table. What do you think about that? Does that sound like a good solution to this question? Okay, good. All right, but the thing is, we can run this argument for just about anything that we want to say about this table. For example, what shape is the table? Well, it looks like an oval right now, but if you're standing in the middle of it, it might look round. How does the table feel? Well, it's going to feel different depending on how hard you're pushing on it. It's going to feel different depending on whether your hands are warm or cold relative to the surface of the table. And you can go on like this and reason like this for just about anything that someone might want to say about this table. So things are looking pretty bad for human knowledge right now if there's so little that we can say for sure about something as ordinary and everyday as a table. Now, you may not find Russell's arguments here to be entirely convincing. Maybe you think that only like a philosopher who's just given up on common sense would worry about something like the shape or the color of the table and wonder whether the table really has a color. But let's listen to the words of the British physicist Sir Arthur Edmonton, who was about as practical of an empirical scientist as you could possibly hope to meet. It was Eddington who famously confirmed Einstein's theory of relativity in 1919 by leading an expedition to a small island off the coast of Africa to observe a solar eclipse from a certain angle and confirm some of Einstein's predictions. So let's listen to a quote from Eddington's 1929 book, The Nature of the Physical World, and think about the way that the scientist's words echo those of the philosopher. So Eddington says, I've settled down to the task of writing these lectures and have drawn up my chair to my two tables. One of these has been familiar to me from my earliest years. It is a commonplace object in that environment which I call the world. How shall I describe it? It is extension means that it takes up space. It is comparatively permanent. It is colored. Above all, it is substantial. Table number 2 is my scientific table. It is a more recent acquaintance, and I do not feel so familiar with it. It does not belong to the world previously mentioned, that world which spontaneously appears around me when I open my eyes, though how much is objective and how much subjective I do not here consider. It is part of a world which in more devious ways has forced itself upon my attention. My scientific table is mostly emptiness. Sparsely scattered in that emptiness are numerous electric charges rushing about with great speed, but their combined bulk amounts to less than a billionth of the bulk of the table itself. All right, so just so everyone's on board, Eddington's not actually talking about two tables here. He's talking about two different ways of seeing the same table. Now, which one of Eddington's tables is the real table? Is it the ordinary table or the scientific table, or does one of these really have a claim to priority as being the actual table? So going back to Russell, consider the passage from this chapter where Russell discusses looking at the table with a microscope. Of course, what you see is going to be a lot different than what you see with the naked eye. When you look at this table with your eye, it looks brown, it looks like it has a smooth surface. But when you look at it through a microscope, the brown color vanishes, and you see this rough surface with a lot of valleys and ridges. Now, which one of those is the real table? And you can always imagine a more powerful microscope, and then which one is the real table? What you see with microscope A, what you see with microscope B, or what you're seeing with your eye? And you can always imagine yet more powerful equipment, and you can wonder whether you're going to see something then that's stranger even than Eddington's scientific table. So how many tables do we have now? And what's more, we need our senses in order to use any of these scientific instruments, and those are the very senses that we're starting to see we can't actually trust. So we can start to wonder, is there a real table that's to be found here anywhere? So it seems like the real table, if there even is one, it lies beyond our senses. What Russell is doing here in this chapter of the book is drawing a distinction between appearance and reality. So appearances are what we're immediately acquainted with through our senses. Although we normally take appearance to be a good guide to the world around us, as Russell points out, the information that we're getting through our senses, it's often contradictory. We're often getting information that can't be right because it contradicts some other information that we're getting. So it seems like our sensory information and appearances, those are just not a reliable guide to reality. So reality is what lies beyond the appearances. But given that so much of what we know through appearances, maybe all of it, is open to question, how can we be so sure that there's any reality behind those experiences at all? So if we can't say anything about the table, why assume that there is a table? So we might think that the information that reaches us through our senses, it's got to have some kind of objective reality lying beyond it. But how can we be so sure about this? What do you think? How do you think we know that there's some reality behind the appearances? Or can we? So when we start to consider the possibility that there may not be a real table, we're entertaining a skeptical scenario. So skepticism is to consider the possibility that the world external to our senses, to our minds, may not exist, or that we may be radically mistaken about what it's like. So throughout the history of philosophy, philosophers have considered the possibility that we're completely mistaken about everything that we believe. And this idea has taken various forms over the years. Sometimes it's just someone like Russell pointing out that we can't really trust our sensory information about the external world. By external world, I mean the world outside of our minds, outside of ourselves. Sometimes people consider the possibility that the whole world might be a dream. In the next class, we're going to meet a philosopher named Rene Descartes who wondered whether there might be an evil devil who's tricking him into believing everything that he thinks he knows. This demon is making him hallucinate and making him believe that he has a body and believe that he's in the world interacting with other people when really none of that's true. So a little bit later in history, the scenario was typically that you're a brain that's being kept alive in a vat of chemicals in a laboratory somewhere, and all your experiences are really an evil scientist manipulating your brain somehow, applying electricity in just the right places. And how would you prove that wrong? You could say, well, you know, I have feelings, I see a world around me, I have memories, but that's just really that scientist working on your brain. She knows a lot about the brain, and she's really good at what she does. So what would you say to someone who suggested that for all you know, you might be a brain in a vat in a laboratory somewhere being experimented on in that way? How would you argue against someone who claimed that? Or could you? So today, the most often discussed scenario is that we're in a computer simulation, something like the Matrix movies, but really the exact scenario or the exact story, it's not important. When philosophers discuss these situations, the idea, it's not really to convince you that you're a brain in a vat or we're in the Matrix. By challenging everything that we think we know, we can question how much we actually know or how much knowledge we actually have that penetrates beyond appearances, and how we can trust that knowledge and be sure that we actually have it. And we can think about what kind of foundation we might have for what we know. So we can see now what Russell's up to and what philosophers are up to in general when they think about these kind of scenarios. We start by introducing doubts about how we routinely interpret sensory information, and this makes us question what it is we can know, if anything at all, about the world beyond appearances. And we're looking for some sort of foundation, some sort of secure foundation to base our knowledge on. So in future chapters, we're going to meet several philosophers who took up this challenge of doubting everything and then building knowledge back up from secure foundations. And we'll see at least one philosopher who didn't think this was possible and thought that we really don't know much of anything at all. And we'll look at the solution that Russell himself comes to, and we'll see what kind of solution we can come to and what we think about this.